Alrighty, welcome back to another video. I'm going to be reacting to Dyer Masterclass from Dyer Archive. Now, this is just kind of a mashup. This is going to be a little bit longer of a video also. But the individual videos that this whole video is taken from, I think, I've watched like multiple times over. So it might not be too fresh of a video, but it'll be kind of more of a review. And I'll pause and give some of my thoughts on the way. But also I think that this video alone, I've watched many of Dyer's like little clips that are maybe like 6 to 10 minutes long, or maybe like, I don't know, 6 or 7 minutes long or something like that. But I think that the insights in this video are especially invaluable, especially for beginners like me. I've only been studying apologetics for about 2 to 3 years now, actually ever since I became a Christian at like 16. So anyways, without further ado, I think that this video is super enjoyable, and let's all have a good time with it and get educated, I guess.
Can we see that? X is the necessary condition of Y. Y, therefore X. Now, granted, I know that no atheist is going to accept that when I plug in God or the preconditions or anything like that, but the structure of the argument is not, my argument is God exists, therefore God exists. Okay, do you see that anywhere in that? Did I ever say, I know God exists because God exists. I presuppose God, therefore God exists. Do you see that in it? Is that the same as this? No, it's not. This is... There's nothing, I mean, it should be self-evident in a way. I don't believe in self-evident truth, but in a limit.
I was about to say, that's one thing I caught at first when I first watched this specific video. Like, oh, he doesn't believe in self-evident truths. Like, I thought, isn't logic kind of self-evident? Like, when you deny logic, you predicate it. So the predicate is reducible to the subject in the sense that it's inescapable, at least in a cognitive way. But that's what it was, is only in a cognitive way. In a metaphysical way, I think what Jay is getting at, and somebody can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about this, but what he's getting at is these truths are undeniable, but they're not self-evident in the sense that they don't rest on anything else. You know, and he'll go into logic's metaphysical status, the self's metaphysical status. Descartes can say, I think, therefore I am, but the status of the I in that proposition needs to be proven metaphysically, though. You know, it's undeniable that there's an occurrence of thinking happening, but it's not just self-evident how this self is existing, though. It could be just a bundle of perceptions, as Hume says, for example. Anyways, let's move on.
Limited sense, right? It should be obvious to any reasonable person that this is not a fallacy. If X is a necessary condition of Y, and if Y is the case, then clearly, by necessity, X is the case. It's very simple. Okay, it's not rocket science. I know people get confused over transcendental arguments. They think this is some wild, obtuse.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I realize about transcendental arguments is it's really just a reductio ad absurdum against every other position when you strike it up against it. Like, for example, logic, I remember I had a hard time, like, oh, well, what if somebody tries to give a material justification for logic? Well, good luck. They're not going to be able to give a material justification for logic. And it's not a fallacy of incredulity either, because it's not that I just can't imagine logic being a material substance, like a physical chemical or something of that sort. It's that logic, the necessary precondition, and, you know, again, X is the necessary precondition of Y therefore X, like Dyer is saying here. The necessary precondition for logic is different attributes like immateriality. You can't even conceive of logic or talk of logic or anything of that sort ontologically without it having that status of immateriality. Alright, I'll move on.
Out there thing. It's actually really simple. What's Father Deacon's analogy he always makes? Cake, right? What are the necessary conditions of having a cake? Flour, eggs, sugar, icing. Okay? I have a cake. If I have a cake, then by necessity, I have the necessary conditions of cake. Flour, icing, eggs, milk, whatever. I don't know. Whatever makes a cake. I don't know. I don't need that soy Pillsbury Doughboy diet that old John Lennox is over there eating. Okay? I eat the carnivore diet.
Okay, all respects to John Lennox. I think he's really smart. But anyways.
But if I did eat cakes, then by necessity, the cake would include the necessary elements of cake to have cakeness, namely flour, eggs, milk, sugar, etc., etc., etc. To quote Bernardo from West Side Story. So,
I have no clue who Bernardo is and West Side Story is. Side note. Dang it.
Do you guys see this? Because I just wanted a little minute to rant there about the bottom of the barrel IQ stuff going on in the atheist comment sections. Because there's probably at least 400 or 500 atheists in Matt Dillahunty's comment section on our debate and underneath my debate on my channel with him. They're literally saying, this guy thinks that saying God exists is the argument for God's existence.
Yeah, and that's incredible because I've watched the entire debate through and through with Jay Dyer versus Matt Dillahunty, and that is not at all what Jay Dyer was saying. The main pinnacle of the debate where they had kind of a stalemate, which I think Jay Dyer was still winning, was Dyer was asking for a justification for things like logic and these transcendental preconditions. Dillahunty was just saying, well, you need to prove that they needed justification or a metaphysical grounding first. And so it came down to who's going to ask for more justification at the fundamental level. And I believe Dyer ultimately answers that question better than Dillahunty, therefore has a more coherent worldview. And obviously some of the philosophical things, like the uniformity of nature got brought up, which is just incoherent in Dillahunty's worldview. But anyways, let's keep going.
And they literally think that saying a transcendental argument is word salad. Okay, this is not word salad. This is very simple. So we're dealing with severely mentally incapacitated individuals, right? That's what we're dealing with here. And ultimately, remember, atheism isn't primarily an intellectual problem. Atheism is a spiritual problem, as many of the elders and fathers and saints say. Without soul, there is only darkness. If we are to believe there is a single cosmos, it must be that the cosmos is.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to comment on that last one real quick. Yeah, it's a spiritual problem. I mean, we see the excursus in the in Romans 1, for example, that all men know the law, but they suppress it. They suppress it in their own sin and everything. Keep going.
Is contained in some single soul. If there is a way of seeing things right, then there must be an intellect, and indeed that which contains and decrees right answers. But if there is no equivalent single soul, then the phenomenal world is always far astray. Our experience is always delusory and, by comparison, multiple and transient. If we are to believe not only that there are right answers, but that we can discover them, it must be possible for God himself, he says Zeus, he's speaking of the Greek view, to become incarnate, or for there to be someone somewhere who has the mind of God, and not just an ethereal abstract thing, but in his actual life within time and space. That's Christ. For Plotinus, the incarnation was the world soul herself in all reality, which is nonsense. At once our elder sister, Gnostic, and at the same time the fullest expression of soul herself. But maybe there has to be a more particularized embodiment, correct? and one that can be grasped from within this synthesis. That man is each man is a microcosm of the larger. And then he goes on to say that, well, we don't have this divine mind of ourselves. We get it through an incarnate God.
Yeah, see, this is why I'm watching these videos and studying and reading. And, you saw in the thumbnail, I have Dyer's book. I'm still reading through it. But I don't know if you can see, but I have my bookshelf over there. But I'm trying to read a lot and actually get smarter and all this stuff. But what I think he's saying here is he's kind of articulating a divine conceptualism, and basically that for these universals in general to exist, there needs to be a divine mind that encapsulates them. Almost kind of like Berkeleyan idealism, I believe. I literally just read about that today. But yeah, we'll keep going and see what.
So, when you understand that, when you read my essay, and when you read the argument that Stephen Clark is making, then what we see is that it's not just a question of numbers, but all of these other things that you could list that are, you can call them transcendentals or categories or preconditions. We'll call them transcendental preconditions. We're just going to list some. And somebody asked the other day, is there a perfect list of all of them? No. How could there be? Let's just look at a few, and we start to see that although on the surface this argument might seem really obscure, it's not. It's actually pretty, man, these lights just don't work with this. Okay, so let's take the first one. Time and space. Okay, now this is a transcendental category that you cannot empirically verify. And don't give me the low IQ reply of, well, I have a watch. Your watch is not the same thing as time itself. Time itself is some kind of abstract category. Doesn't matter what you want to define it as. Point is that it's not proven to exist merely by empirical investigation. Yes, I know it's a measurement. It's a measurement of the rate at which light travels or whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't care about how you define it. The point is that it's not defined or known merely by empirical investigation. But it's presupposed in the way humans interact in the world, right? We experience the world from beginning to middle to end. There's no human being on the face of the planet that experiences things in reverse, right? And we also experience and learn things within a spatial field, a visio-spatio-temporal field. That's how we learn things. There's not a human being on the planet who does it in a different way. We are beings constituted such that we learn things in a spatio-temporal field of vision, right, in the here and the now. Well, how do you prove that empirically? You can't. It's an assumed transcendental precondition of knowledge.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that comes to mind immediately when I see this, again, watching and being a big fan of J. Dyer, would be to say, well, can't you deny time and space? But what comes from this is absurdity, though. In order to deny time and space, you need to presuppose them for argumentation in itself. Argumentation, again, words and meaning. A self is making an argument. A self and words and meaning have time determination in the argument. Each premise is based in a different position in time, and also space. Where are these words coming from? Different things of these sorts. So I think that's interesting, but that's one of the insights I've learned.
An experience. The self. You cannot empirically demonstrate that you have a self. It's presupposed in all actions of cognition, communication, noetic energies, ratiocinations, etc. There's no test tube, no microscope that's going to show you the self.
Exactly. I think my favorite argument for that would be Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism, where it either leads to absurd skepticism epistemologically, or you have to deny the naturalistic account of humans and affirm that they actually have a self with agency.
That words have meaning and that they can convey meaning to other persons. It's another transcendental category. There's no empirical verification that you are transmitting the right meaning to another brain, another bunch of gray matter. It has to be assumed. The past.
I'm sorry I'm pausing so much, but also, if anybody knows any good readings for linguistic philosophy is one of those areas that I'm very, very gray in. So, for example, idealism I literally just read about it. I'm going to watch a video about Hegelian idealism from Dyer soon. But I've read Locke, and I don't know, he wasn't an idealist, but I've read Berkeley, a selection from Berkeley. And so Berkeleyan idealism is the only kind of real sophistication I have with an actual philosopher. I've read, obviously, like general philosophy on idealism, but any linguistic philosophy, though, would be really nice because, again, all these other areas like idealism, metaphysics, and, well, I guess linguistic philosophy is in linguistic philosophy. But I think you guys get what I'm saying. I really would love to dive in deeper into what Dyer was talking about with words and meaning. I think he didn't spend that much time on it. But anyways.
This is a transcendental category that you cannot empirically prove exists or existed. It is assumed in the way that we as humans experience time and space and operate. Universals. Right? There's no empirical verification for universal categories, invariant concepts, numbers, etc., but that we know they exist. Ethics, right? Where is the ethics under the rock? Where in the microscope? Where in the test tube are the ethics? They are nowhere there. So they are assumed. These are just examples of things that are, and again, you can come up with more. But these are examples of transcendental preconditions for the possibility of even having knowledge at all in this world and operating in this world. None of these things are proven or known by empirical investigation. Are they related to empirical investigation? Yes, but they are presupposed in empirical investigation, and they are not the immediate subject of any empirical proof or investigation.
Yeah, that's great. So any denial of these leads to absurdity. And so therefore you have these transcendentals that are already your first premise, that these transcendentals are true, they exist, and so therefore we're going to need a justification for those. This is where Dyer is going to go next.
So does that mean we cannot know these things or prove these things? No. That's where the transcendental argument comes in, because it is an argument based on the denial of any of these things as leading to absurdity. So when we come to the question of God and God's existence and the mind of God and the mind of Christ, etc., that I just mentioned in the Stephen Clark paper that I cited in my paper, we can ask another question. How do these different things relate to one another? Because our experience of the world is not chopped up into only having spatio-temporal relations without a self, right? No, that would be nonsensical. Spatio-temporal experience assumes a self that's having the spatio-temporal experience. And when we speak or write words that have meaning to convey that meaning to another chunk of gray matter in somebody else's head, it assumes that they have a self. It assumes that these words and these meanings are entering into spatio-temporal relations to convey that meaning, becoming mediums for information being conveyed from one person to the next. what it is to be a self is partly bound up with the past. I'm not an abstract category. I'm not a platonic form. I'm not the number 7. I'm a person who has a past, a life that began at a point in time. Part of my past is partly what makes me up, and you and everybody else, right? So there's no neutral kind of, I don't know what it would even be, like some abstract neutral self that doesn't have experiences. That's impossible, right? Universals, universal categories, universal laws of logic, universal in terms of predicates. These are presupposed in speaking. So the point is that when you just take a little sampling here of these kinds of things that are not like material things, and you say, well, these don't operate on their own, they all work together. Yeah, exactly. So how do they work together if there's not a God that holds them all together? That's the argument.
Boom, right there. Boom, right there. All these undeniable things. This is why I love this. You know, I discovered the transcendental argument a while back. I think I discovered it about maybe, give or take, 6 or 7 months ago. And I'm not even kidding you. It like really changed my view entirely. Like one thing from like listening to some of Bonson's lectures was that it takes the question so far back fundamentally that the person cannot deny God's existence in any case. Well, obviously they can deny it psychologically, but ontologically, metaphysically, God has to exist for the denial of his existence. And this was one of the things that just blew my mind, that all the classical arguments rely on these things, but don't justify these things whatsoever. All the classical arguments rely on some form of foundationalism. And thanks to Dyer and his lectures and reading philosophy on my own and studying, now I know that I'm not a strong foundationalist anymore. I'm a presuppositionalist now, because all these arguments that are classical will rest on self-evident principles, which really are just undeniable and circular at the face in an epistemological way. You know, denying logic. Logic is the subject is reducible to the predicate, therefore it's undeniable. But metaphysically, though, boom, this argument, I think, just blows all the other arguments out of the water, no matter how unpopular it might be. But that's just my opinion. We'll keep going now.
Because what Platonism at least shows, in the Platonic argument that Clark was interacting with, it can only go so far, and then it's terrible. It screws up at the key point. Because they can point out some of these things, and then they say, oh, and the answer is just that it's all a number one. It's all just the one, man. No, it's not. You need a mind, and the human mind is not enough to encapsulate and relate all of these things together in all of their different particulars in every different human being's life and existence. But if you believe in God the way that we speak about God, that's exactly what he does. He fulfills this precondition. He is the ultimate precondition for all the other preconditions. That's the argument. So I hope that's helpful. It does at first seem a little kind of abstract and, whoa, that's weird, what? But I think when you understand it, it's like, oh, wow, yeah. What else would it be? But nothing else even makes any sense if it's not God.
I mean, yeah, I think there's several problems with Platonism he brought up briefly, which I'll try to dissect here in a minute. I think with Platonism, one of the problems that you get for Platonism being the justification is, one, it's just, especially with something like ethics, I don't think it's very reasonable whatsoever to theorize that there is just this universal of justice or this universal of goodness, but it's not a personal attribute of God, which makes it universal. I think that that's something like that is unreasonable. I think with Platonism also, it begs the question of how we as particular minds access these universal ideals and these universal metaphysical principles, such as logic, ethics, words have meaning, and different things like that. How we access these as finite minds. What is the link between our, again, using Dyer's terminology, our gray matter and the universal that is in the Platonic form? So I think there's definitely some problems with Platonism. Also, again, the one and the many problem, but I won't get into that right now.
I mean, it's not the human mind. The human mind can't do this stuff. No finite mind can do it. And the atheists can't even get past why there's even needs to be a mind anyway. Because they don't even think they have a mind. As they sit there touting their own mental acumen, which they actually don't have. That's the great irony of that. But anyway. So I hope that's helpful for the transcendental argument question. Dalton, have you been sneaking out of Roadhouse? Have you been sneaking out of busting butts down at the Roadhouse, those drunk rednecks, and doing your Zen philosophy? And macking on Kelly Lynch, Dalton? Can you rip a dude's throat out, Dalton? If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch Roadhouse.
My question is, I got.
This is one of the reasons why I love Dyer too. Just how serious he can be with philosophical things, but also he self-describes himself. Well, he self-describes as a comedian, and it just shows so easily, and it's awesome. Anyways, we'll keep going.
Several questions.
Okay.
I'll first start off is, I've heard you describe metaphysical principles as like these things that we use, these, I guess, not really ideas. Would they be ideas?
Well, I mean, ideas are a metaphysical principle, but there's a lot of different metaphysical principles.
And so and they're all connected, and they're like a string of pearls that's contained in the divine mind.
Well, I was talking about transcendental categories, which are presuppositions for the possibility, preconditions for the possibility of knowledge. So time and space, the self, abstract concepts, laws of logic. I mean, those are all examples of things that we can't directly empirically prove, causation, teleology, but they must be the case for there to be knowledge at all.
Right, and so okay, so
and they don't stand alone. They don't stand alone. They don't stand alone in a vacuum. So
yeah, right.
You
they
can't
have to be contained in the mind. In a
right.
mind,
So they have to be grounded somewhere in a way in which they all sort of work in a synergistic way together. Because clearly causation is not identical to teleology or purpose. So they're distinct things, but they're also, in a sense, have to be connected. Because if we're theists, then the world has a cause, causation exists, and there's also purpose and an end for which the causes occur. So causation and teleology go together in the theistic worldview.
Right. So, okay, and I've heard you say that, this is, only possible in a Orthodox worldview, right?
Right, because a lot of
My question is why? Like, why could that not
because
be?
a lot of positions. Because when you look at all of these things working together, it necessitates a certain type of metaphysic, not just any metaphysic. And so it leads us to a Trinitarian metaphysic.
Sorry for pausing right there, right when he was talking. But yeah, this question is what I had very often, which is, why can't a Muslim say this same thing? Why can't any other religion account for this? Why can't Platonism account for this? And so, yeah, definitely, I think asking the fundamental transcendental questions, you just take these transcendentals that you have, past, time, self, space, logic, ethics, different things of that sort, and you narrow the worldview down just by asking either or questions with those. You know, is the world designed or not designed? Do things exist or not? Is knowledge possible or not? Does the self exist or not? Let's see here. What else can we say? Do universals exist, and are they accessible by human minds? And just different things of these sorts, and you'll start to see that different worldviews break down. For example, empiricism, the notion of empiricism, strict empiricism or naive empiricism, can't be proven by empiricism. So that's out of there. Just by reductio ad absurdum, by transcendental argument. When you look at something like universals, if you are a nominalist and you don't believe in universals, well, the claim that no universals exist, is that a universal truth claim? If it's not, then it's relative, it's contradictory then, because you're making an objective claim, yada, 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 this is going back to basic laws of logic, and so basically rejecting the universality of truth, or objective truth, I should say, nowadays at least, then leads to absurdity. And so, nominalism is out the door now. And different things of these sorts, and eventually, when you review these other religious systems, like Islam, like Mormons, like Jehovah's Witnesses, and any other religion that doesn't have the specific Christian framework in philosophy, you'll start to see these contradictions and incoherences come about in their theologies if you look at the most fundamental level. All right, let's keep going.
Kind of God that we see in Orthodox Christianity that avoids the theological traps and problems of modal collapse, absolute divine simplicity, monism, dualism, etc. Those are all dead-end positions that the other theistic systems won't work. They don't suffice to ground the things that we're talking about.
All right. Also, I would add to, Jay and I did, a stream on the Garrity article, and this is really important too, is that you don't treat each religion just as kind of a ground up, or we just tap these different things and this will work, like kind of bare minimum. But as Garrity says, each philosophy and paradigm is equivalent to what we would call in analytic philosophy and philosophy of language and logic is truth conjunctions. So I'm not going to go too far into detail, but basically every religion or philosophy has a set of propositions about its beliefs such that if you were to take any one of those out, it changes the whole truth about the conjunction of all those. And therefore, as part of like orthodoxy too, is that it is the fullness of truth and that there is no other. So it's basically saying this is true and all the others are false and does not provide a conditions for the possibility of knowledge. So now you have something in a disjunctive argument. It's either orthodoxy or it's not orthodoxy. Part of orthodoxy says that all the other ones are false. So for you to negate that orthodoxy is true or question that, what I show is that it ends up, you're going to be committed to something or believing something in order to negate one of those truth conditions of orthodoxy that will end up as a defeater for knowledge. That's just one of many arguments that we present. Jay just presented one too, that it's not, well, as long as I just get the Trinity, I don't know, like a Jesus that's incarnate and a Bible, and divine revelation, that'll be enough. That's not enough. It's a whole system that includes, it's either the whole or it's not the whole. And if it's
Right.
not the whole, in order to assert that, you'll be it's self-supplication. It would be a defeater for knowledge in order to assert that. So as Jay and I would say, from the impossibility of the contrary, orthodox, it only works in an orthodox position. Jay, I don't know if you want to say some more about
Yeah, let's
that.
look at.
All right, before Dyer goes into his next thing, what he's going to say, I'm guessing all these transcendental preconditions again that are on the screen. I just want to say that, Father Deacon Ananias there, I think what he was saying is true, and it hints at the presuppositional method versus some of these other methods where you go off of what's undeniable and then you try to build up from there. Whereas the apologetic method that I'm trying to hone and that Dyer and Ananias here are arguing is from revelation coming down. It's not us trying to build our way up to God. It's God coming down to us in our philosophy also. It's not by our own works that we're getting up to God and having knowledge of God, but rather God's revelation to us. And so therefore we have to take Christianity as a whole. And I agree. I think that, if you reject something in Christianity that is fundamental, or that if you just try to build up from the bottom up, I think that you might get somewhere a little bit, like the classical arguments, but you're not going to get an entirely concrete position. You're going to get a highly probable position, which other positions in the future, in the past, have been just as probable or even more probable or something of that sort. And so that's one of the reasons why I love this argument a lot too, is that we start with God, not with man. With a lot of arguments, we start with man. We have to, salvage, we have to salvage what we can to get up to God. Whereas no, in presuppositional apologetics, we go from God down to basic things. And so I'll stop my rant on that, but anyways.
Got some examples of things that are preconditions for the possibility of knowledge, right? We could look at the self. How do we speak about knowledge without a knower, right? Doesn't it seem to necessitate some even though I can't perfectly define it, what a self is or what a knower is? I mean, to talk about knowledge assumes that there's some being or agent who has agency to know, to will not to know, or to have intentionality. So I'm going to say that any action of knowledge is assuming or presupposing a self, agency, or intentionality. Knowing for humans, I think you could argue requires some conception of space-time. I may not know exactly how space-time works, but humans are constituted such that they learn things in space-time in a beginning, middle, end sequence. So I think space-time is a precondition of knowledge. I think that unity and diversity are categories that are necessary for the preconditions of knowledge, right? Picking out something amongst a class of things, or I could have used one and many, or I could have used genera, species, particular, etc. I think identity over time is an example. Causation and teleology are examples. The laws of logic. You could look at the notion of abstract concepts and meaning. All of these things are examples of things. You could list more, but these are examples of things that any action, any possible action of knowing, any knowledge event requires these types of things. These things are not under the immediate purview of the action of knowledge, right? So for me to say that the tree outside my office is green, even though I'm not studying these things on my whiteboard here, these things on the whiteboard already have to be the case as preconditions for me to be able to say something like the tree is green and for that to be actually the case.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a big difference that people sometimes, well, a lot of the times miss there, where they're saying, oh, well, you presuppositionalists say that we can't even say that We can't even say sentences without God's existence. And like, well, I'm going to say a sentence, and I'm saying sentences, so therefore your God doesn't exist. Well, no, we're not. This is, Dyer's hitting on the psychology-ontology distinction here. The psychology of just thinking and saying, oh, there's a tree outside my house. Yeah, you can do that without knowing, like, all these preconditions and studying philosophy. Yeah, you don't need to, like, know that necessarily or affirm that God exists. We're saying further the ontology that God has to exist for that to even be possible. So it's not necessarily a knowledge claim. It's more of a metaphysical existence claim. So I hope that clears things up.
Right. So we're gonna say that, assuming for the sake of argument that is the case, just as a test example of some knowledge event, right? Some predication event, the possibility of predication, right? These things, at least, and many other things probably that you could flesh out, would have to be the case to be able to say the tree is green. These are preconditions, and they're prior to any evidentialist type of knowledge. That's why we keep stressing this against evidentialists, is that I'm not going to grant to the atheist his evidentialist claims about this or that thing when he hasn't accounted for these things, which are necessary for evidential claims at all, you see. Now, when I look at these things, it doesn't work for me to say, okay, well, I agree with all these things. Here's the Matt Dillahunty approach. See, all these, they just are. Okay, they just are. That's not a good answer as to, wait a minute. So now you're basically admitting the world is highly structured such that these metaphysical principles now are the case, Matt Dillahunty. But you told me in your argumentation that you shouldn't believe in anything without empirical proof or evidence. There is no empirical proof or evidence for these principles themselves.
Right.
That's Hume's argument, right? So the question then is, how do all of these things work together? Even Fazer admits that these preconditions, these transcendental categories, they don't just stand on their own. They all kind of have to work together, right? Causation and teleology, they kind of work together. Abstract concepts, they kind of need a mind, right? So my argument is that if you bundle all these together and see how they all kind of synergize, this is actually a very powerful, it's almost like a fine-tuning argument applied to preconditions of knowledge.
Right. I mean, it's a beautiful argument. I just having a hard time grasping it. I mean, I don't, it's just, I'm not used to thinking in such an abstract way as that. And so my original question wasn't, and you and Father Deacon are starting to answer.
Well, let's use Father Deacon's classic example of cake, right?
Well, I just want to say, like, I understand these principles have to be contained in the mind. My question was, well, why couldn't the false Muslim God? Why couldn't that be the mind that is contained in? That was my question. Like, that's what I.
Right. So when we get into doctrines like Islam, if you go listen to my Muslim debates, that's when I start. That's when absolute divine simplicity becomes a problem, because they start reducing God to being one thing. And even though they'll say things like, "Well, Allah has 99 names," it really becomes unclear as to how there's real distinctions in Allah. Right, but so Allah can have 99 names and they can be really distinct, but we're polytheists because we say that God's a triad. You see how it starts to be arbitrary. But also, apart from that question, I mean, what I kept trying to drill down in the debate with Azrar Rashid was about, well, do you think that the divine ideas or the pattern or whatever in the divine mind, do you think that they're identical to Allah as well? Are they also the essence or substance of Allah? And that, in other words, if they don't have the essence energy distinction, that's going to be a problem. But even if they do, if they were somehow able to admit some kind of distinction between essence and energy, it's really not consistent with the rest of the Islamic metaphysics. So I would go into other areas like their occasionalism to refute, the Islamic view, and also a bare Unitarian view, as we've shown in many live streams, really doesn't work, because is Allah always is he eternally provident? If he's eternally provident, then there's an eternal creation over which he's provident, but they don't believe the creation is eternal.
That's origin, right? I mean,
it would lead to originism. That's why,
right.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, and I'm Orthodox Christian. We're the only church that has essence energy. Like, even Catholics reject that, right?
Correct.
And then you can't, I think I heard you talk about this Palamas says that you cannot know God because all you would know is just created manifestations. You cannot, if there's no essence energy.
Right. So it depends on what the opponent says. There's one point where Barlium makes the argument, and he later contradicts himself, but there's one point in the dialogue where Barlium says, oh, well, you don't actually know God directly, you just know created effects. And Palamas says, okay, well, then if we're always only knowing created effects, then we never actually know if we're knowing God's mercy, God's love, God's justice, or any. It's just created effects. Yeah. So we never know God himself, which undercuts the incarnation because it's so stupid.
Yeah, it is. I don't understand how. I've heard you debate Thomas about this. How could anybody say that the Transfiguration was created grace? I don't understand that.
Thus the slow boy nature of their exactly. I mean, how do you say it's just ridiculous?
Absurd, man.
Well, that's how they rescue the system. They will go anywhere to rescue the system because they know if they can see that it's not, then it's pretty much over for Thomism.
Okay. One more question, Jay, and I'm gonna move on. Let somebody else talk.
Sure.
So I was listening to your Sam Harris critique the other day, and he kept talking about, Sam Harris keeps bringing up this whole there's brute facts. There's just a brute fact. This is a brute fact.
Right.
And you say that there's no brute fact.
Right.
Before I keep going, I just want to comment on that last one. It's been a little while since I've said anything. That is one of the areas that I am definitely the weakest in, is other religions. I'm getting better, and I'm studying even more, but I think one of the things, too, is evidence can be brought in for something like Islam. Although I think the philosophical side is much more concrete and airtight. I think the evidence can be brought in, such things as like the Islamic dilemma, go, inquire of the people of the book. And then the people of the book, if the Bible's false, then the Quran is false. If the Bible's true, then the Quran is false. Different things of these sorts. And I think that evidences like that can be very, very helpful and good arguments. I think they are good arguments. But obviously not as good as a transcendental argument, which Dyer does. But this is one of the things that I'm trying to definitely get better at with Thomism, Bare Unitarianism, different things of this sort. And that's one of the things that I was saying earlier, actually. So with religions like Islam and, some Christian cults, Bare Unitarianism can be used to, in a philosophical way, bunch all of these other world religions into one category, Bare Unitarianism. You ask somebody, what is your God? Well, he's one God, one person, one being, just one in every sense and way. And there you go. You research Bare Unitarianism, and then you refute Bare Unitarianism, and voila, congratulations. You just refuted all these other world religions because you've shown that they lead to absurdity using a transcendental-esque argument. And so that's one of the reasons why I stress this argument so much. And I actually really, really enjoy it. So, anyways, let's keep going.
Now, I'm just trying to work this out in my head. So, okay, if I assume there's a self, okay, and I say that's a brute fact, and of course you would say it's not, right? It's not a brute fact to say that I'm a self, I'm an individual, some kind of conscious being of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
That's not self-evident, or is it not? Or is it?
Well, no, I mean,
my question is, how is it not? Like, if I'm able to empirical sense data, like if I go touch a chair and I can feel the wood and I can look at the legs, I'm seeing with my eyes, how is that not saying that I'm empirically sense dating this object, so therefore the self has to be a brute fact? Because there's no such, because you're assuming all of these things that have not yet been proven. So remember, a brute fact is but I can see it though. Like
that's begging the question. Hold on. Let's take some examples, and Father Deacon's really good on this too, so I'll let him speak in a second. But I mean, you're assuming that you're seeing something like this occur. So you are receiving sense data impressions from an external object, but this event itself does not tell you that there's a meaningful external world with this meaningful object that is imprinting causally this sense data upon you. You're just assuming that. There's an event occurring, there's a sense data occurring, and you are interpreting it as the chair in the external world that is causing that. That's an invalid leap that you can't justify.
Okay, well, how does that not lead to like this, like, you know, Buddhist, Hindu, like everything's an illusion?
No, I'm not. You're confusing. You're confusing the argument with adopting the whole position. I'm just making the point against a foundationalist epistemology that David Hume would make. That doesn't mean I'm adopting David Hume's skepticism. The point is that there's no justification for that view given the empiricist starting point. In other words, you want to be an empiricist. You want to. That's what you're. See, a lot of people don't understand that when you have this view, you got to take the empiricist system as a whole. You can't make
and
these.
Furthermore, and that's what Hume did, right?
Yeah.
And furthermore, what brute fact means and self-evident has a very specific meaning. So we're not just using this kind of colloquially.
Right.
What, as Jay had pointed out, like it's just a scene. You just see it as there's no need for explanation. But as Kant and the followers of Kant and Strauss and Sellers point out, there is no scenes. There's always a scene as, according to concepts and paradigms and all these different things. And so we really need to kind of unpack what these words, brute fact, means and self-evident principles. So, as I argue, a self-evident principle is a principle that, just in case it is true, and if adequately understanding it's enough to make you justified in believing it. So that's kind of like what the definition of a self-evident proposition, fact, phenomenon, etc. So I'll just repeat. A claim is said to be self-evident or phenomenon.
Yeah, so commenting on that last one real quick, I think they're hitting on the phenomenal-noumenal distinction that Kant developed, that we don't experience things in themselves ever, but we only experience the sensations of them. And so basically, if there's this microphone in front of me, I'm not actually sensing whatever is actually there in the external world. Instead, I'm interpreting whatever is there in the external world through my mind or my senses, and he kind of says that there's different categories that our sensations actually go into, and then are interpreted as. So we never see things in themselves necessarily. So like Deacon and I said, there's no scenes, but only seen as. And so that's very interesting. That's very, very interesting. And so we'll keep going.
Just in case it's true, and adequately understanding it is enough to make you justified in believing it. Now, let's go to the first problem. It begs the question, how do we know that claim's true? Well, just grant me my assumption so I can give you my definition that supports my whole position. No, that's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Second, the notion of what constitutes adequate understanding, which is in part of the definition of a self-evident principle, is something that's too ambiguous or vague. On whose adequate understanding? And you'll see this across the board with philosophers. Any rational person that any adequate understanding, right? And of course, it's all couched in terms of their philosophy and what Kant or Hegel or Berkeley would say, right? So it's disingenuous. They pretend like, well, we all mean the same thing by understanding, adequate understanding, true, but it's not at all. And that too begs the question, wait a minute, how do we even suppose I wasn't ambiguous about what it means to be adequate understanding. Aren't I getting ahead of myself epistemologically? I mean, I'm already granting the understanding understanding exists without me being able to actually show that I've obtained the criteria for what counts as understanding before I've done it. So it's begging the question. In other words, it seems what it actually wants to prove. And the third critique of brute facts or self-evident principles is in that notion. Remember I said, in case it's true and adequately understanding what the phenomena is or the propositions enough to make you justify in believing it. Well, here you have the term enough, which is a sufficient condition to make one justified in holding that belief. That's simply false. That's not enough. That's based on an erroneous and false assumption, as Jay pointed out, by classical foundationalism or any variety of foundationalism that has this kind of correspondence theory that, well, our propositions or our seemings, or as you said, like the sensing out there, they just have their meaning. They just are what they are in isolation from the rest of our propositions, beliefs, paradigms, and theories. In other words, it's the position that's asserted that our theories and other ideas don't contaminate our propositions, beliefs, and seemings and appearance. And that's just patently false. So I think it's a good analysis of what, brute facts and self-evident propositions are, and then a threefold critique of those, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I've still got to work some things out, but I feel like I'm getting it. And Jay, I appreciate your patience with me, and thank you, Father Deacon.
Yeah, let's look at another way to argue this too, which I was thinking about the other day when I read Father Deacon.
This is my favorite example. This actually helped me understand so much more of the begging the question of empiricism and self-evidency and different things of that sort. And just like how like fundamental philosophy drives down. That's one of the things I love about philosophy, which philosophy never ends, I think. Obviously I don't believe that there's going to be, there is an infinite amount of things to know as humans. We're finite. But, again, that's with a Christian presupposition. But I think with philosophy, one of the incredible things that I love about it is that it just seems like it never ends. You can always question everything again. You can always get down to be more certain about something. The argument or the ideal that you think is, rock solid, somebody can come along and say even a simple critique or something of that sort, and you have to rethink your whole system again. And once you rethink your whole system again, you either dissolve what is not good and what is not justified and kind of arbitrary or something of that sort, and you get something even better, or you throw out as a whole what was incoherent or unjustified, and you take a whole new philosophical system. I mean, that was me. Like, I had a big shift when I was doing a lot of the classical arguments and different things of that sort. When I started watching Transcendental arguments, presuppositional apologetics, I went like right from foundationalism right into presuppositionalism. At least, and in apologetic method. I love like people like William Lane Craig and a lot of other classical apologists who would adopt something like a foundationalist framework probably. But that's one of the things that I love about philosophy, is that it just always can make you more wise and knowledgeable with ultimate things. What can I truly know and what truly exists? What's right and wrong? Is anything right and wrong? Different things of that sort. That's why I love philosophy. All right, let's keep going.
Deacon's Quine paper. So, there's no, even if we wanted to say or think that there was some epistemic bootstrapping project that was possible, that we could achieve a kind of purely neutral, objective, raw impression of sense data, right? The idea that this could be done, first of all, we've kind of already shown isn't really possible on the empiricist starting point. But even if we did think that we could do like some version of this, let's give an example of something that is presupposed here that we may not have noticed that we're invalid in concluding. So let's say that we have an individual who is engaging in the touching of a chair, right?
I hope my hand doesn't look like that, guys. I hope. Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Touch this chair, baby. We have sense data impression number 1. Oh, I touched the chair, it was solid. And then sense data impression number 2, I moved my hand down the smooth back of the chair, and the place where your back rests is actually really smooth, and it's different. So sense data impression number 2, and then we have sense data impression number 3. I lifted the chair up, and it seemed to weigh 30 pounds, and so you've got this what seems to be, you think, raw sense data impressions imprinting upon you from, right, this external object chair out here in the world. So here's the hand, here's your lusty hand thrusting at this chair, and then the chair is, you think the chair is causally, right, imprinting this sense data upon you. Well, let's not even get into the fact that we don't know what a you is, right? What is this you that's receiving this sense data? Look at this invalid leap from this series of events here. I'm assuming that in this raw sense data number 1, that there was some meaningful impression from an object in the external world that is the same object in sense data impression number 2. But I don't know that. I've just assumed that. And the fact that one event temporally succeeded another event does not prove that it's the same object out there. Now you might say, well, you're being ridiculous. Nobody really thinks that it's different objects. Oh, really? But my point here is that to go from sense data impression number 1 to sense data impression number 2, as if there is a shared thing between 1 and 2, and yet at the same time, these are two distinct events, right? But I'm pulling out distinct properties from a single object. That's a non sequitur. In other words, I am doing pattern recognition, assuming that there's qualities and properties in this object. And that's going beyond the raw sense data that I was supposed to be just receiving. In other words, the raw data here, to assume that it has a pattern recognition status with the raw data here, is an invalid move. That's a leap. The sense data does not grant the leap from 1 to 2 or from 2 to 3, or that all of these 3 share some commonality. Do you see that?
There's no way to obtain knowledge or learn about the external world without assumptions.
Sure.
And so why could they not reverse that on us and say, well, how do you know?
Bro, right. So all we're doing is showing that their empiricist starting point doesn't work. I'm not saying that there's no commonality between these events. There is. But I don't have the problem because I don't have their worldview. This is a problem for their worldview.
Right.
So they can't turn it on us because I would just say, well, I'm not an empiricist. So the problems aren't a problem for me because I believe in all these categories and metaphysical principles. You are saying that you don't believe in all these metaphysical things and these conclusions. You're saying that you can't validate these metaphysical claims, and then you're using all these metaphysical claims to even make a claim that there is a, quote, meaningful sense data impression. You can't. Okay. That's the point.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And remember what knowledge, kind of the traditional sense, actually is. It's not just having a correct belief, a true belief, but having the justification for it.
Yeah.
So we can justify it, and they can't.
No.
Well, yeah. I mean, think about it. I mean, if they just say, "Oh, because I have these," how do I actually determine that my belief is true? In other words, what are my right reasons? Oh, just a set of further unjustified assumptions that I've just made up or that I can't defend. Like, well, how is that a justification? And if you're basing your arrival or ascent of that true belief based on a belief that's unjustified, then you don't have knowledge. from your position. That's all we're pointing out. So we're not pointing out that your belief is about that there's, external world, et cetera, is false. We're just saying from your assumptions and starting points, you're unjustified, and you can't actually assert that it is a true belief because you have no justification for it. That's all we're pointing out.
I'm not saying there's no knowledge. I'm saying on your position, there's no knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, great questions.
All right, man. Thanks, man. God bless.
You too.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much for watching this video. I just realized I was muted the whole time, so I'll have to cut to this point. And but anyways, all I was saying was that was a great representation of, I got all my notes here, of the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. I like to tout it because I learned that fallacy a long time ago. I didn't realize there was a simpler name just called false cause fallacy. But in between all those sense data impressions where, I can pick up the desk and it feels like it's 50 pounds or something. I can touch the desk. It's smooth. I can see the desk and see that it's rectangular and square, and that it's wooden. That there is a assumption that this is the same object that is in the external world, which you're just receiving sense data impressions, and you're interpreting that as the external world. And so, really, that's assumed, and also that this is the same object over time is also assumed. Why couldn't it be a different object, but you're just perceiving it and interpreting it as the same object over time? And so I think that was a brilliant demonstration. That was one of the examples that really expanded my mind and helped me to understand something that is philosophically deep. I still believe that it's philosophically deep, but kind of boiled it down to make it understandable for somebody like me. And so thank you so much for watching this video if you got to this point. Thank you so much for just watching in general. I put a lot of hard work into these videos, and obviously I study a lot, I read, I just watch videos, and I'm kind of addicted to this, so I hope you guys enjoy this. And again, thank you so much for watching and doing what you do. Until next time, I'll see ya. Keep philosophizing. Christ is King. And yeah, thank you so much.